I always thought the hardest day of my life would be the day my father died. I was wrong. That day was brutal, yes, but nothing compared to the moment I sat in a stuffy lawyer's office, my hands trembling in my lap, and listened as my father's will was read aloud. My older sister, Julia, sat beside me, her face composed, her lips pressed into a thin line. The lawyer's voice was steady, almost bored, as he announced that Julia would inherit our father's prized possession, the family home recently appraised at $950,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. I'd always known Dad favored Julia, but I never imagined he'd make it so painfully obvious, even in death. Then came my turn. The lawyer cleared his throat and read my name, his eyes flicking up to meet mine for just a moment. To my daughter. Emily, I leave the house on Maple Street. My heart leapt until I realized which house he meant. The old crumbling place on the edge of town. The one everyone said was haunted by bad memories and broken dreams. The house Dad never spoke of, the one he'd let rot for years. My inheritance was a pile of bricks and ghosts. Julia's hand found mine, but her grip was cold. I could feel the eyes of my mother, the lawyer, and even the portrait of my father on the wall, all waiting for my reaction. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but all I could do was sit there, numb. As Julia's smile grew just a little too wide, I had no idea why my father had done this, but I was about to find out that the truth behind his decision would change everything. I thought I knew about my family and about myself. Growing up, our family looked perfect from the outside. We lived in a tidy brick house on a quiet street, the well-kept lawn, and a golden retriever named Max. My father, respected accountant, was the kind of man who mowed the neighbor's lawn when they were sick and never missed a Sunday at release. And we all know I've been exploring that. Church, my mother, always gracious and composed, kept our home spotless and our lives running smoothly. And then there was Julia, our older sister by 3 years, the golden child in every sense. Julia was the daughter my parents had always dreamed of, beautiful, poised, and effortlessly talented. She won spelling bees, led the school orchestra, and brought home report cards covered in A's. My father would beam with pride at her every accomplishment, his arms slung around her shoulders as he told anyone who would listen, "That's my girl." I was the quiet one, the bookworm who preferred drawing in the margins of my notebooks to playing piano recitals. I tried, in my own way, to earn his attention, joining the soccer team, volunteering at the library, even baking his favorite cookies, but my efforts always seemed to pale in comparison to Julia's shining achievements. I remember one summer afternoon when I was 10. Julia had just won a regional science fair, and my father threw her a party in the backyard. There were balloons, a cake with her name in blue icing, and a crowd of neighbors clapping as she showed off her trophy. I stood at the edge of the crowd, clutching a drawing I'd made for Dad, a portrait of our family, smiling under a bright sun. When I handed it to him, he glanced at it, smiled distractedly, and set it aside to take another photo of Julia with her trophy. That moment stuck with me, a tiny ache that never quite faded. It wasn't that my father didn't love me. He did, in his own way. He'd ruffle my hair when I passed by, or leave a note in my lunchbox on the first day of school. But there was always a distance, a sense that I was orbiting around the bright star that was Julia. My mother tried to bridge the gap, encouraging me to find my own path. But even she seemed to accept that Julia was the center of our family's universe. As we grew older, the differences between us only deepened. Julia went off to college on a scholarship, returning home with stories of internships and new friends. I stayed closer to home, working part-time jobs and taking classes at the community college. Family dinners became quieter, with Julia dominating the conversation and my father hanging on her every word. I learned to fade into the background, to keep my thoughts and dreams to myself. Still, there were moments when I felt close to my father. On rare evenings, he'd invite me to help him fix something in the garage, his hands steady and sure as he explained how things worked. Those were the times I cherished, even if they were few and far between. But as the years passed, even those moments grew scarce. The old house on Maple Street, my so-called inheritance, was a place we never spoke of. I only remembered visiting it once, as a child, when my father had to check on a leaky roof. The house felt cold and empty, filled with shadows and silence. I never understood why he kept it, or why he never let it go. Now, sitting in that lawyer's office, the memories of my childhood felt sharper than ever. The contrast between Julia's life and mine, between what we were given and what we had to fight for, was suddenly impossible to ignore. I couldn't help but wonder if my father's final act of favoritism was just the last chapter in a story that had always been about Julia. But deep down, small stubborn part of me hoped there was more to the story, something I had missed, something waiting to be discovered in the crumbling house he left behind. The car ride home from the lawyer's office was silent. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Julia drove her knuckles white on the steering wheel while I stared out the window, watching the world blur by. My mother sat in the back, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on some distant point only she could see. I could feel the questions burning inside me, but I didn't trust my voice not to crack if I spoke. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Julia was the first to break the silence. "Emily, I know this isn't what you expected," she said, her tone carefully measured, almost rehearsed. "But Dad must have had his reasons. Maybe he thought you'd want a project. You always liked fixing things." I turned to look at her, searching her face for any sign of guilt or understanding. "A project. Julia, he left you a house worth almost $1 million. He left me a pile of rubble. How is that fair?" My voice trembled, but I didn't care. The words had been building inside me for years, and now they spilled out, raw and unfiltered. Julia's eyes narrowed, her composure slipping. "It's not my fault, Emily. I didn't ask for any of this. Dad made his decision." "Maybe if you'd been around more enough," my mother interrupted, her voice sharp. She stepped between us, her eyes flashing with a mix of anger and exhaustion. "This isn't the time to fight. Your father is gone. We need to respect his wishes." I stared at her, feeling a fresh wave of hurt. Respect his wishes. How can I respect a decision that makes me feel like I never mattered to him? Mother looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, I thought she might cry, but she just shook her head and walked inside, leaving Julia and me standing in the fading light. Julia let out a long sigh. "Look, I know things haven't always been easy between us, but maybe there's something about that house you don't know. Dad was always so secretive about it. Maybe he wanted you to find something there." I frowned, caught off guard by her words. "What are you talking about?" She shrugged, her bravado faltering. "I don't know. He used to go there sometimes, late at night. I thought maybe he was just checking on it, but I don't know. He never talked about it. Maybe there's more to it than we think." Her words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I remembered the one time I'd been to the Maple Street house, how my father had seemed tense and distracted, how he'd rushed me back to the car without saying a word. I'd always assumed it was just another one of his quirks, but now I wondered if there was something he'd been hiding. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying the day's events over and over in my mind. The anger and hurt were still there, but now they were mixed with something else, an gnawing curiosity I couldn't shake. Why would my father leave me that house? What was he trying to tell me? I thought about Julia's words, about the late-night visits and the secrets my father had kept. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the will was more than just another act of favoritism. It was a message, a puzzle I was meant to solve. Asterisk, the next morning, I found my mother in the kitchen, staring into her coffee cup. "Mom," I said quietly, "why did Dad keep the Maple Street house? Why did he leave it to me?" She looked up, her eyes tired and wary. "Your father had his reasons, Emily. He was a complicated man. Sometimes he did things that didn't make sense to anyone but him." I pressed on, desperate for answers. "Did he ever talk to you about it? Did he ever say why he never sold it?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, he just said it was important to him. That's all." Her evasiveness only fueled my suspicion. I could feel the tension in the house, the way old wounds were being reopened with every question I asked. Julia avoided me, retreating to her room or disappearing for hours at a time. My mother grew quieter, her eyes shadowed with secrets she refused to share. But I couldn't let it go. I needed to know the truth, even if it hurt, even if it changed everything I thought I knew about my family. And as I stood in the hallway, staring at the faded photograph of my father on the wall, I made a silent promise to myself. I would go to the Maple Street house. I would find out what he left for my aunt. Why? Because deep down I knew this story wasn't over. Not yet. It didn't take long for the tension in our house to boil over. The next evening, as I was gathering the courage to ask my mother more questions, Julia stormed into the kitchen, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "Are you really going to mope around forever, Emily?" She snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Dad's gone. The will is what it is. You can't change it by sulking." I felt something inside me snap. "Do you think this is about the money? About the house?" "It's about Dad making it clear one last time that I was never enough for him. That you were always his favorite." Julia's eyes flashed. "That's not fair. You have no idea what it was like for me. Always having to be perfect, always. Having to live up to his expectations. Maybe he left you that house because he thought you'd actually do something with it, instead of just running away from everything." I stared at her, stunned. "You think I ran away? Stayed here. I took care of him when he got sick. Where were you, Julia? Off living your perfect life while I watched him fade away." My mother's voice cut through the argument, trembling. "With anger and pain, enough. Both of you. This isn't what your father would have wanted." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Emily, please, just let it go." But I couldn't. The words hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. I grabbed my keys and stormed out, the need for answers burning in my chest. I drove through the night, the city lights giving way to the dark. Empty streets near Maple. The house loomed at the end of the block, its windows dark, its paint peeling in long, sad strips. I parked out front, my heart pounding as I stepped onto the creaking porch. The front door groaned open with a push. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I wandered through the empty rooms, each one filled with shadows and memories I couldn't quite place. The wallpaper was peeling, the floorboards warped, but there was something almost peaceful about the quiet decay. I wandered into what must have once been the living room. A faded armchair sat in the corner, and beside it, a small wooden desk. I ran my fingers over the surface, feeling the grooves and scratches. Something about the desk caught. My Aja drawer that didn't quite close. I tugged it open, expecting nothing more than a few old receipts or maybe a broken pen. Instead, found a yellowed envelope, my name written on the front in my father's unmistakable handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. With trembling hands, I slid the letter out and unfolded it. "Emily," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And you're standing in the house I could never bring myself to let go of. I know you must be hurt, and I'm sorry for that. There are things I never told you, things I should have said, but didn't know how. This house is more than it seems. It holds memories, yes, but also answers. I left it to you because I believe you're the only one who can understand what it really means to our family. Look deeper, Emily. Trust yourself. You'll know what to do." Tears blurred the words as I read them again and again. My father's voice echoed in my mind, softer than I remembered, but somehow more real than ever. The anger and hurt I'd carried for so long twisted into something else, a desperate need to know the truth. I sat down on the dusty floor, the letter clutched in my hands, and let the silence settle around me. My father had left me more than a crumbling house. He'd left me a mystery, a challenge. It may be just maybe a chance to finally understand the man I'd spent my whole life trying to please. As the first light of dawn crept through the dirty windows, I made a decision. I would do what he asked. I would look deeper. Because whatever secrets this house held, I was ready to face them even if they changed everything. I drove home from Maple Street as the sun rose, folded carefully in my pocket, my mind spinning with questions. The world outside looked unchanged, people, walking dogs, sprinklers hissing on manicured lawns, but inside, everything felt different. My father's words haunted me, echoing in the quiet spaces of my heart. I wanted to believe there was a reason for all of this, that he'd seen something in me worth trusting. But the old ache of being second best gnawed at me, sharper than ever. When I walked through the front door, Julia was waiting in the hallway, arms crossed, eyes red from crying or lack of sleep. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me with a wary, defensive look. I brushed past her, too raw to talk, and went straight to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, the letter in my hands, reading it over and over, searching for meaning in every line. Look deeper, Emily. Trust yourself. But how could I trust myself when I'd spent my whole life doubting every step? Later that morning, Julia knocked on my door. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice softer than before. I hesitated, then nodded. She sat beside me, her hands twisting in her lap. "I'm sorry about last night," she said quietly. "I shouldn't have said those things. I don't know how to handle any of this." I wanted to forgive her, to reach across the gulf that had always separated us, but the words caught in my throat. "Did you know about the house? About Dad going there at night?" She shook her head. "No, I just knew he was hiding something. He always kept me at arm's length when it came to that place. I thought maybe he was ashamed of it, or maybe it reminded him of something he didn't want to remember." We sat in silence, the weight of unspoken things pressing down on us. I wanted to ask her if she ever felt like she was living someone else's life. If she ever wondered what it would be like to be seen for who she really was, not just who our father wanted her to be. But I didn't. Instead, I told her about the letter, about Dad's cryptic message. She listened, her expression unreadable. "So what are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to just walk away, sell the house, forget about all of this. But another part of me, I feel like I owe it to him. Or maybe to myself. I need to know what he was trying to tell me." Julia nodded, but I could see the distance in her eyes. "Just be careful, Em. Sometimes digging up the past just makes things worse." Her words stung, but I knew she was speaking from her own pain. We were both lost, both trying to make sense of a father who had loved us in ways we never fully understood. The rest of the day passed in a blur. My mother tiptoed around me, her eyes full of questions she was too afraid to ask. I caught her staring at me once, her lips pressed together, as if she was holding back a secret. I almost asked her about the house, about Dad's late-night visits, but something in her expression stopped me. Maybe she was just as confused as I was. That night, I lay awake, the letter on my nightstand, the words running through my mind like a song I couldn't turn off. I thought about all the times I'd tried to win my father's approval, all the ways I'd measured myself against Julia and come up short. I wondered if this was his way of telling me I was enough, or if it was just another puzzle I'd never solve. I knew I couldn't ignore the house or the secrets it held, but I was scared of what I might find, and even more scared of what it might mean for the family I was trying so hard to hold together. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I promised myself that tomorrow I would go back to Maple Street. I would look deeper, just like my father asked, 'cause even if the truth hurt, I needed to know. I needed to finally understand why he chose me. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was joined by something new: hope. Maybe, just maybe, my father had seen something in me that I'd never seen in myself. I grabbed the letter, stuffed it in my bag, and drove back to Maple Street, determined to find the answers he'd left behind. The house looked even more forlorn in the daylight. Sagging porch and boarded-up windows, a stark contrast to the neat homes on either side. I let myself in, the door protesting with a groan, and stood in the entryway, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. I remembered my father's words, "Look deeper." I started in the living room, searching for anything out of place. The desk where I'd found the letter yielded nothing new, so I moved to the kitchen, opening every drawer and cabinet, running my hands along the walls for hidden compartments. Dust coated my fingers, and frustration threatened to overwhelm me. But then, in the hallway, I noticed a loose floorboard near the base of the stairs. My heart pounded as I knelt down and pried it up, revealing a small metal box tucked beneath the wood. My hands shook as I lifted it out and opened the lid. Inside were old photographs, yellowed with age, and a stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The top photo was of my father as a young man standing in front of the very house I was, in his arm around a woman I didn't recognize, a woman with my eyes. I sat on the floor, the box in my lap, and began to read the letters. They were from my father to his first love, a woman named Margaret. The words were full of longing and regret, Stories of dreams they'd shared and promises they couldn't keep. As I read, I realized that Margaret was my father's first wife, my mother's older sister who had died before I was born. The house on Maple Street had been their home. It's a place where they'd planned to build a life together. Tears blurred my vision as the truth settled over me. My father had kept the house all these years, unable to let go of the memories and the pain. He'd left it to me, not as a punishment, but as a way to pass on a piece of his heart, a piece of our family's history that only I, with my quiet, persistence and need for understanding, could truly appreciate. For the first time, I saw myself not as the forgotten daughter, but as the keeper of our family's story. My father had trusted me with the truth, believing I was strong enough to carry it. The anger that had fueled me for so long faded, replaced by a deep, aching gratitude. I closed the box, holding it to my chest, and whispered a silent thank you to the man I was finally beginning to understand. As I left the house, sunlight streaming through the broken windows, I knew I would never see myself for my father same way again. I drove home from Maple Street with the metal box on the passenger seat, my mind swirling with everything I'd uncovered. The weight of the secret felt lighter than I expected, almost as if, by finally knowing the truth, I'd set something free inside myself. I wasn't sure how Julia or my mother would react, but I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. It was time to share what I'd found, to let the truth reshape the story of our family. When I walked through the front door, Julia and my mother were sitting at the kitchen table, the tension between them thick enough to touch. I set the box down and took a deep breath. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They looked up, wary and expectant. I opened the box and laid out the photographs and letters, explaining what I'd discovered. I told them about Margaret, my mother's sister, my father's first Levand, how the house on Maple Street had been their home. I read aloud parts of the letters, my voice trembling as I shared my father's words, his grief, and his hope that I would understand. For a long moment, no one spoke. My mother's eyes filled with tears, her hand covering her mouth as she listened. Julia stared at the photographs, her expression softening as the pieces fell into place. "I never knew," she whispered. "He never talked about any of this." Shook my head. He couldn't let go. That's why he kept the house. That's why he left it to me. It's why he wanted someone to remember, to honor what he'd lost. I think he believed I could do that. My mother reached across the table, her hand finding mine. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I should have told you more about Margaret, about your father's past. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting myself." Julia wiped her eyes, her voice thick with emotion. "I always thought you were the strong one, Em. I was jealous, you know? Dad expected so much from me, but you always seemed to know who you were." Her words surprised me, and for the first time, I saw the cracks in her armor, the pressure she'd felt, the loneliness that mirrored my own. The old rivalry between us softened, replaced by something gentler, more honest. We sat together, the three of us, letting the truth settle and reshape the space between us. Not everything was magically fixed. There were still wounds, still questions that might never be answered. But I felt a new sense of peace, a quiet empowerment that came from finally being seen, not just as the forgotten daughter, but as the keeper of our family's story. My father's choice no longer felt like a slight, but a gift, a chance to heal, to remember, and to move forward. As the afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen window, I realized that closure doesn't always mean forgetting the pain. Sometimes it means understanding it, honoring it, and letting it become part of who you are. And in that moment, surrounded by the people I loved, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Looking back, realize how easy it is to let old wounds define us, to believe the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're worth. For so long, I saw myself as the overlooked daughter, the one who never quite measured up. I let my father's silence and my sister's shine convince me that I was destined to live in the shadows. But the truth I found in that crumbling house changed everything. It taught me that sometimes the things we inherit aren't just material, they're the burdens, secrets, and hopes our families carry. Often in silence, I learned that forgiveness isn't about excusing the past, but about understanding it. My father's choices were shaped by grief and love, by memories he couldn't let go of and dreams he'd lost along the way. By uncovering his story, I found compassion for him, for my mother, and even for Julia. We were all just trying to find our place in a family shaped by loss and longing. Most of all, I discovered my own strength. I realized that my value doesn't come from what I'm given, but from what I choose to do with it. The house on Maple Street, once a symbol of rejection, became a testament to resilience and hope, a reminder that I am more than the sum of my family's mistakes. If you're listening to this and feeling the sting of betrayal or the ache of being overlooked, I hope you'll remember, sometimes the greatest gifts are hidden in the places we least want to look. Don't be afraid to dig deeper, to ask the hard questions, and to claim your own story. Because what you find might just change everything. And if you think this story is over, trust me, it's only the beginning.